Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, was a man whose heart was truly set on seeking the Lord. He was known for his love for God, his dedication to truth, and his deep desire to walk in the ways of righteousness. Unlike many rulers before him, his true mission was not about expanding his kingdom or amassing wealth. His deepest desire was to lead his people back to God, the source of all strength. From his early reign, Jehoshaphat made it his mission to turn his people's hearts back to God, sending out priests and Levites to teach the laws of God in every city of Judah. His reign was marked by peace and prosperity as he brought spiritual renewal to the nation, teaching the people to trust in the Lord. But even for a faithful king like Jehoshaphat, trials were never far. One day, messengers came rushing into the court with news that shook the kingdom to its core. A vast alliance of enemies was forming. Armies from Moab, Ammon, and the region of Mount Seir were marching toward Judah, preparing to attack. The combined forces were so numerous that they seemed impossible to count, like an overwhelming wave of destruction heading straight for Jerusalem. Fear spread across the land like wildfire. The people knew that if this army reached them, they would be devastated. Jehoshaphat, too, was filled with fear. But unlike other kings who might have relied on their military might or sought alliances with neighboring nations, Jehoshaphat did something different. He turned to the one who had always been his strength, God. The king immediately called for a fast throughout all of Judah. He urged the people, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, to seek the Lord with all their hearts. The people gathered from every town and village, filling Jerusalem, to cry out to God in one voice. In the midst of this gathering, Jehoshaphat stood before the assembly in the courtyard of the temple. His prayer was not one of desperation alone, but of deep faith. He lifted his voice to heaven and said, "O Lord, God of our ancestors, you rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. Power and might are in your hand, and no one can stand against you. If calamity comes upon us, whether by sword or judgment, plague or famine, we will stand before you and cry out, and you will hear us and save us. We are powerless before this great multitude, but our eyes are on you." This moment of humble surrender was the turning point. Jehoshaphat did not pretend to be strong in his own right. He did not seek human wisdom. Instead, he acknowledged Judah's helplessness and placed all of their trust in God. And it was then that the Spirit of the Lord moved mightily. As the people stood in prayer, Jahaziel, a Levite from the line of Asaph, suddenly rose, filled with the Spirit of God. His voice rang out with a message that turned fear into faith. "Do not be afraid or discouraged because of this vast army, for the battle is not yours but God's. Tomorrow march out against them. You will not need to fight this battle. Stand firm, hold your position, and see the salvation of the Lord on your behalf." Can you imagine the power of those words? The people were on the brink of devastation, but God was assuring them that He Himself would fight for them. It was not by their strength, but by His. The impossible was about to happen, not through the might of their swords, but through the might of their faith. The next morning, Jehoshaphat and his army obeyed. But instead of forming traditional battle lines, Jehoshaphat did something extraordinary. He appointed worshippers, singers, and musicians to lead the army into battle. These worshippers sang praises to God, lifting their voices to heaven with these simple but powerful words: "Give thanks to the Lord, for His love endures forever." Imagine the scene: an army of men marching toward what should have been certain death, but instead of carrying weapons, they carried songs of praise. Their hearts were filled not with fear, but with trust in the God who had promised to deliver them. As their voices rose in worship, something miraculous happened. God moved. Without Judah lifting a single sword, the Lord set confusion among the enemies. The Moabites and Ammonites, who had come together in hatred, suddenly turned on each other. In their confusion and rage, they fought among themselves, and by the time Jehoshaphat's army reached the battlefield, the enemies had destroyed one another completely. Judah's army arrived to find the valley strewn with the fallen bodies of their enemies. Not a single one remained. The Lord had fought the battle for them, just as he had promised. All that was left for Jehoshaphat and his people was to collect the spoils, a task that took them 3 full days because of the abundance of riches left behind. On the 4th day, Jehoshaphat and all of Judah gathered in the valley of Barakah, which means blessing. There they praised and thanked God for the great deliverance he had given them. It was not by their strength, but by their faith that victory had come. This moment of victory wasn't just about overcoming an external enemy. It was about revealing a deeper truth about the character of God. Jehoshaphat's faith teaches us that the greatest battles in our lives are not won with human strength, strategies, or power. They are won when we turn to God, lay down our fear, and trust in his ability to fight for us. And Jehoshaphat's life had more moments where God's grace was revealed. After the battle, Jehoshaphat continued to rule wisely, turning the hearts of his people even more toward the Lord. He strengthened the judicial system, appointed judges who feared God, and encouraged them to judge with righteousness and integrity. His reforms were meant to build a nation that did not just seek external success, but a deeper, lasting relationship with God. However, Jehoshaphat was not perfect. There was a time when he allied with the wicked king Ahab of Israel, a man who despised God's ways. In an attempt to gain favor, or perhaps out of fear of neighboring threats, Jehoshaphat joined Ahab in battle, but God in his mercy spared Jehoshaphat from destruction, though Ahab perished in the fight. Upon returning to Judah, a prophet named Jehu confronted Jehoshaphat, reminding him that God's favor is not for those who seek alliances with the ungodly, but for those who trust in him alone. Through this experience, Jehoshaphat learned that true strength, peace, and victory come only from reliance on the Lord. It was a lesson that, though hard, brought him back into deeper dependence on God's goodness. As we reflect on Jehoshaphat's life, it becomes clear that his story is a reminder to us all that we must seek the Lord first in every situation. Whether we face battles that seem insurmountable or challenges that test our faith, God calls us to turn to him. He asks us to trust, to worship, and to let him take the lead in our battles. Just as Jehoshaphat learned, we too must realize that the battle belongs to the Lord. It is not through our might, but through our faith that we will see the victory he promises. When we worship him in the midst of our trials, when we place our trust in his unfailing love, we open the door for God to work in ways we cannot even imagine. In the end, Jehoshaphat's reign was marked by peace, and God gave him rest from his enemies. His story echoes the truth that when we seek God with all our hearts, we too will find peace, for it is God who fights for us. Let us be like Jehoshaphat, standing firm in faith, worshiping through the storm, and trusting in the God who delivers.